Good morning. It is Thursday morning, April 2nd, here for our last sociology lecture for the week. Our question of the day is, what is the culture of poverty? We've been talking about poverty where it relates to social class in the United States. Finished up yesterday talking about children in poverty and how they're more likely to be in poverty than anybody else. I like to go ahead and get going with the dynamics of poverty. Yesterday I asked you to look over the critical thinking on page 284. I hope you took the opportunity to kind of read that over. I'm not going to go over it. Figured you guys could read that over. Going to get into the dynamics of poverty. Some have suggested that the poor get trapped in a culture of poverty. They assume that the values and behaviors of the poor make them fundamentally different from other Americans and that these factors are largely responsible for their continued long-term poverty. Behind this concept is the idea that the poor are lazy people who bring poverty on themselves. There are some individuals and families that match this stereotype. Many of us have known some of them. But it is a specific self-preparation culture that the poor people transmit across generations and that locks them in poverty based because of the U.S. poverty. So basically what that is, and I messed it up as I read it, but it's a question. Is there a self-perpetuating culture, one that the poor people transmit across generalizations that locks them into poverty for some reason based on U.S. poverty? Researchers who began following 5,000 poor U.S. families in 1968 uncovered some surprising findings. Contrary to the stereotypes, most poverty is short-lived, lasting only a year or less. Most poverty comes about because of dynamic life change, such as divorce, loss of job, or even a birth of a child. In 2008, I'm sure poverty went up quite a bit because of the economic downturn that we had and the recession that we faced. People did not hold on to jobs and stuff because there was an economic turndown. A lot of people were laid off. I lost a job in 2008. Fortunate for me, I had another avenue. I could go back to school and work on continuing my education and getting my degree. But some people weren't that lucky. So that would be a life-changing event that happened that may have caused some people to fall into poverty. Okay. Figure 1010 on page 286 shows that only 12% of poverty lasts 5 years or longer, contrary to the stereotype of lazy people contend to live off the government. Few poor people enjoy poverty, and they do what they can to avoid being poor. But from 1 year to the next, the number of poor people remains about the same. People come in and people go out. People who move out of poverty are replaced by people who move into poverty. Most of these newly poor will also move out of poverty within a year. Some people even bounce back and forth, never quite making it securely out of poverty. Poverty is dynamic, touching a lot more people than the official totals indicate. 13% of Americans may be poor at any one time. Twice that many, around 1/4 of the U.S. population is or has been poor in the last year. We looked at the figures the other day, and when we started figuring out that poverty line and how they figure it out, and it also said that if you're $1 over that poverty line, you're not considered being poor. Well, that doesn't really translate. I don't care what the numbers say. I tell you right now, if I had $10 and you had $11 and we go out to buy something, there's not going to be a whole lot of difference in what we can buy. So $1 difference doesn't really add up. It just doesn't work out. Okay. So that's why so many people can be in the poor category and they can bounce back and forth all the time. Okay. Now, the book asks, why are people poor? Well, there's two explanations for poverty, and they compete for our attention. The first, which sociologists prefer, focus on the social structure. Sociologists stress that features of society deny some people access to education or the learning of job skills. They emphasize racial, ethnic, age, and gender discrimination, as well as changes in the job market, the closing of plants, the elimination of unskilled jobs, and the increase in marginal jobs that pay poverty wages. Some people find their escape route from poverty to a better life blocked. It's there. We have lost thousands to millions of factory jobs over the last few years. Okay. So that adds up to putting people in that poverty level. A lot of people who would be considered unskilled labor who worked in factory jobs turn around and have lost those factory jobs and had no place else to go. Didn't have the opportunities to go back and get an education, go back and change and go into different fields. So that kind of accounts for a lot of that poverty. The other explanation focuses on the characteristics of individuals that are assumed to contribute to poverty. Sociologists reject individualistic expectations such as laziness, the lack of intelligence, viewing these as worthless stereotypes. Individualistic explanations that sociologists reluctantly acknowledge include dropping out of school, bearing children in teen years, and averaging more children than women in other social classes. Most sociologists are reluctant to speak of such factors in this context, for they appear to blame the victim, something that sociologists bend over backwards not to do. I like to take a look at thinking critically on page 286, and I'll just kind of buzz through that a little bit. Throughout U.S. history, Americans have divided the poor into two types, the deserving and the undeserving. The deserving poor are people who in public mind are poor through no fault of their own. Most of their working poor, such as the Lewises, are considered deserving. Nancy and Ted Lewis in their early 30s have two children. Ted works 3 part-time jobs, earning $13,000 a year. Nancy takes care of the children and house and is not employed. To make ends meet, the Lewises rely on food stamps, Medicaid, and household subsidies. The undeserving poor, in contrast, are viewed as people who brought on their own poverty. They are the freeloaders who waste their lives in laziness, alcohol and drug abuse, and promiscuous sex. They don't deserve help, and if given anything, they will waste it on their dissolute lifestyles. Some would see Joan as an example. Joan, her mother, and her 2 brothers and 2 sisters live off welfare. Joan started having sex at 13, bore her first child at 15, and now at 23 is expecting her 4th child. Her first 2 children have the same father, the third a different father, and Joan is not sure who fathered her coming child. Joan parties most nights, using both alcohol and whatever drugs are available. Her house is filthy, the refrigerator usually empty, and social workers have threatened to take away the children. Okay, this division of poor into deserving and undeserving underlines the heated debate about welfare. Why should we use our hard-earned money to help them? They are just going to waste it. And of course, there are others who want to get back on their feet, and helping them is okay. Okay, so for your consideration, why do people make distinction between deserving and undeserving poor? Should we let some people starve because they brought poverty on themselves? Should we let children go hungry because their parents are drug abusers? Does unworthy mean that we should not offer assistance to people who squander the help that they are given? In contrast to thinking of poor people as deserving or undeserving, use sociological perspective to explain poverty without blaming the victim. What social conditions of society, create poverty? Are there social conditions that produce the lifestyles that the middle-aged class so despises? Okay, so that was the thinking critically. Something for you to think about a little bit. We're kind of going to get into welfare reform here. After decades of criticism, the U.S. welfare system was restructured in 1996. A federal law, the Personal Responsibility and Work Opportunity Relocation Act, requires states to place a lifetime cap on welfare assistance and compels welfare recipients to look for work and to take available jobs. The maximum length of time that someone can collect on welfare is 5 years. In some states, it is less. Unmarried teen parents must attend school and live at home or in some other adult supervised setting. The law set off a storm of criticism. Some called it an attack on the poor. Defenders replied that the new laws rescue people from poverty. They would transform welfare recipients into self-supporting and hardworking citizens, and reduce welfare costs. National welfare rolls plummeted, dropping by about 60% out of 2 of 5. 60%, 2 out of 5 who left welfare also moved out of poverty. 3 of 5 are still in poverty and are back on welfare. A third of those were forced off welfare have no jobs. Some can't work because they have health problems. Others lack transportation. Some are addicted to drugs and alcohol. Still others are those who have jobs but earn so little they remain in poverty. Um, and on page 287, got an example here. Joanne Sims, 37, lives in Erie, New York, with her 7-year-old daughter, Jamie. Joanne left welfare and now earns $7.25 an hour as a cook for Head Start. Her 37-hour week brings home $268 before deductions. With the help of medical benefits and a mother who provides child care, Joanne gets by. She says, from what I hear, a lot of us who went off welfare are still poor. Let me tell you, it's not easy. So that's the big hang up about taking people off of welfare. If you take them off too soon and they don't have the opportunities to make enough money, then they're in trouble. We've talked about it before. This minimum wage increase, we're going to be bumping it up to $15 an hour eventually. Has a lot to do with that. A lot of people who lost factory jobs and couldn't find other jobs and had to go to work in fast food and grocery stores and places like that, which were typically jobs for high school and college students, now are trying to raise families. Sometimes you have 2 adults working in fast food, making $8, $9 an hour, trying to get by, trying to pay rent, trying to pay maybe a car payment, health insurance costs, all these things. And so that's why they're trying to raise that minimum wage to $15 an hour to try to help out those people. And the benefits are going to be the high school and college students who are going to get paid the same because that's the way it works. Okay. The downside to that is that there's probably going to be some jobs lost before it's over. You already noticed McDonald's and Taco Bell have kiosks in there and people go in and start ordering there. McDonald's went down from having 4 registers before the remodel. Now they've got 2. So the maximum people who be working behind the counter would be 2 people. So they've already cut that down. You can't have 3 and 4 people working behind the counter. Taco Bell has 2. Everybody else has 2. So it's already cut down the number of people working the counters. Okay, so that's kind of another drawback to that minimum wage thing is there's going to be less people working because they're paying people more to be there. Okay, and expect you to do more work because you're getting paid more. All right. Conflict theorists have an interesting interpretation of welfare. They say that the purpose of welfare is not to help people, but rather to maintain and reserve labor force. It is designed to keep the unemployed alive during economic downturns until their labor is needed during the economic boom. The 1996 law that reduced the welfare rolls fits that model, as it was passed during the longest economic boom in U.S. history. Recessions are inevitable, and just as inevitable is surging unemployment. In line with conflict theorists, we can predict that during the coming recession, welfare rules will be softened in order to keep the reserve labor force ready for the next time they are needed. How about now? With this COVID-19 going on and all these places that have had to shut down and people are out of work, getting on the unemployment rolls and stuff. The U.S. and state governments have tried to do some things to keep those people going until such a time that this COVID-19 is over and places open back up and people go back to work. Okay. Predictions are that the economy will take off like crazy after this downturn. But how long will this downturn last? We already know we're going through the end of April now. Is it going to go farther? We just don't know. We're hoping by all accounts that things will, this curve they talk about will level out and go down, and we will start seeing a reduction in new cases of COVID and deaths and all that stuff. So this would be definitely an economic downturn, and it would be a time when a lot more people could possibly get on these welfare rolls. And if conflict theorists are correct, then they're trying to keep a workforce ready. Okay. Deferred gratification, the giving up of things in the present for the sake of a greater gains in the future. It is difficult to practice this middle class virtue if one does not have a middle class surplus or a middle class hope. In 1967 study of black street corner men, sociologist Elliot Linebow noted that the men did not defer gratification. Their jobs were low paying and insecure, their lives pitted with emergencies, with the future looking exactly like the present, and any savings they did manage gobbled up by emergencies. It seemed pointless to save for the future. The only thing that made some sense from their perspective was enjoy what they could at that moment. Immediate gratification was not the cause of their poverty, but its consequence. Cause and consequence looped together, however, through immediate gratification, helped perpetuate their poverty. In the late 1800s, Horatio Alger was one of the country's most popular authors. The rags to riches exploits of his fictional boy heroes and their amazing success in overcoming severe odds motivated thousands of boys of that period. Although Alger's characters had less disappeared from literature, they remain alive and well in the psyche of America. From real life examples of people of humble origins who climbed the social class ladder, Americans know that anyone who really tries can get ahead. In fact, they believe that most Americans, including minorities and the working poor, have an average or better than average chance of getting ahead. Is that still true? Can anyone get ahead? Is it hard work and dedication? Is it falling into things? Is it being in the right place at the right time? What is it that allows people to overcome their conditions, their class position? The accuracy of Horatio Alger myth is less important than the belief that limitless possibility exists for everyone. Now, functionalists would stress that this belief is functional for society. It encourages people to compete for higher positions, but it places blame for failure squarely on the individual. If you don't make it, then fault must be of your own. Horatio Alger's myth helps to stabilize society, since the fault is viewed as the individual's, not society's. Current social arrangements can be regarded as satisfactory, which reduces the precautions to change the system. Okay. Marx and Weber pointed out social class penetrates our consciousness, shaping our ideas of life and our proper place in society. When the rich look at the world around them, they sense superiority and anticipate control over their own destiny. When the poor look around them, they more than likely sense defeat and to anticipate that unpredictable forces will batter their life. Like fish that don't notice the water, people tend not to perceive the effects of social class on their own lives. The Down to Earth on page 289, it's a personal journey, poverty, a personal journey. I'll leave that for you to read. Okay. That talks about says, I was born in poverty. My parents could not afford to rent a house or an apartment. They rented a tiny office in their minister's house. And this is where I was born. So it just goes on and tells that little story there. Okay. Now that is going to wrap up this chapter. With everything's gone on, it seems like this chapter has lasted forever, but that's pretty much the end of this chapter. So what I'm going to do is later today, I will get the study guide posted on the Teams app. Today is Thursday. I will give you probably until Wednesday. I'll give messages on Monday and Tuesday, remind you about things and the questions of the day. But then on Wednesday, I will do a full review over the study guide. By Wednesday evening, you'll have to submit your study guide, and I'll give you points for doing your study guide and filling it out. And then probably Thursday or Friday, I'll put the test on and let you take the test. That's about the best I can do in these circumstances. And then we'll move on and we'll see what we go to next. Okay. I would like to go ahead and assign watching of the Breakfast Club, but I will redo those questions on a Word document so that I can post it on the Teams app, and then you can go through and answer those questions after watching the Breakfast Club. Okay. That'll be it for today. I hope you stay safe. Have a great weekend, and I will be back on here again on Monday.